atheist activists who has an interesting angle, like a specialty, if you will. This is Damien Marie AtHope, and he specifies or specializes in the archaeological anthropological origins of religious belief. Damien.
Hey, how you doing? Yeah.
Take this thing over and explain it, because I've seen a lot of the posts that you do, like on Facebook and everything, with your own original artwork and everything, but talking about different aspects of how religious belief began. And I'm hoping that you'll just be able to like run amok here for a little bit and explain your position on all this.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you remember when I first met you in San Diego, back when I was living in California, like about maybe 9 years ago, you told me to calm down because I have a tendency to be very boisterous, very loud, and very opinionated. What I try to do is model myself with reason. And so I make reason my only master. And that's something I've done ever since I went to college and found out that religion was a lie. And that's actually how I found out and why I have a particularly different sort of brand, I would say, or style of how I approach atheism. I was already an atheist for 3 years before I ever met another atheist. I didn't know there was atheist books. I didn't know, I had never heard even concepts of atheism. In fact, I didn't even know I was an atheist when I became an atheist because I actually didn't understand the concept. I knew I didn't believe in gods anymore. I just didn't know what that meant. But what really did it for me was in college was being shown archaeological facts and stuff. Even as a Christian, these are facts. I can't deny facts. And so that's what made me start to want to approach religion, in my own way, which was, well, what's real? Now that I know that there's some falsehood, I didn't know what was real. And so I really wanted to know, not just, think I know, and I saw there were some flaws. And so I wanted to go, well, when did this start? I mean, because it seemed like, it had to start pre, some of these organized religions. And the more I looked back, just being willing to see. And that's another thing to me is, it's not like I knew all of it at once. And I take both approaches, the archaeological and then the anthropological. Archaeological I see as mainly focusing more on the data and the facts. And if you do this, it'll be harder for you to concept what religion is, because you're looking like through a microscope. It's not that it's not inaccurate; it's very accurate. The problem is if you only look through a microscope, you don't see the other things that are since connected to it. And I think that's what really helps, especially because religion is not like something you find in the ground per se. You don't read something and it says, "Aha, this is now religion," as opposed to before it was not. It's more like you see these archaeological things, and then when you understand the concepts in a sense, a larger cultural idea of like anthropology. And then for me, also understanding ethnography, which is in a sense the understanding of cultures today or past cultures and their relation to other cultures. To me, that's what really helps me understand too, because like say the Bushmen of Africa, say worship the fire, but they do it different in the day and they do it different in the night. At night, it's more magical and supernatural. In the day, it's more like real world problems we resolve in a sense. So understanding that also helps you look, I believe, at a lot more accurately to the past than what we would do now. Because if I had a Christian background and I look at, fire, I wouldn't think anything. But not knowing that actually fire worship is quite old. And in fact, even you can see this behavior not limited to humans. But there's even baboons that will run at the sun's coming up, will run up to the top of, cliffs in Africa and look at, or try to get a view of the, sun coming up. And I think it's those similar kind of just basic superstitious ideas. And then I have a degree in psychology, and that's actually what got me into finding out that religion was flawed. Because the psychology told me I wanted to be a drug and alcohol counselor. They told me, well, if you're going to deal with people, you need to know different religions, not just Christian that I was. So that way you can, actually help these people and not be abusive. Because it's really easy if you only have your own mind frame to start from to just push it onto people. And so they were really, they helped me, stop for a second and want to know, not just want to know if these religions were false, but want to know what they are, so I don't, in a sense, straw man, like in philosophy, just make up something that's not real. And so, for me, it was interesting because at first I thought everything stopped in a sense, or started, I should say, at animism. But the more that I, researched animism, it wasn't like humans just invented this. It was already, in a sense, the groundwork laid in a sense, pre, what we consider, modern humans now. And that was to me the most profound thing. It's like, but the more it goes back, the simpler and just basic, needs it comes. And so I can see that, religion is not this special thing. It's not something that, that came out of nowhere. It's just these little feeble, superstitions that just kept building on each other thousands of years and going on. So to me, understanding really basic. What's that?
Let me jump in with
okay.
something. One of the things that I noticed is that the idea of a soul. I mean, every religion has this idea.
Yeah.
That you've got some magical element in you, some essence of yourself.
Yes.
That some evaporous, some substance, supernatural substance, if you will. I mean, whatever it is. I mean, like in the Harry Potter movie, you see somebody die and then the little glowing white light comes out of them. And there's always some kind of a mist spirit sort of a thing that comes out of people. And that's what it's all about. That's what all religions are all about. But then I realized, reading the Bible, oddly enough, that everywhere that it mentions the word breath, in some translations, it says spirit in other translations. And I realized, doing a little bit more research, that is in fact what it is. They knew that they didn't know that air was particulate matter. They thought that air was spirit. They thought that wind was spirit. It's like one of the reasons that I named myself Amen or Aron Ra is to nod to Amen Ra, the air god, who I see as a template for Western monotheism, on the belief that people have souls, right? Like when Jesus gave up the ghost, in one translation, he breathed his last in another, right? In Ecclesiastes 3:18-21, where they mention that, who knows whether the spirit of the beast goes down to the earth or the spirit of man rises. In one translation it says spirit, and another one it says breath, and I realized that's what it is. These people think that air, when somebody dies and that last gasp comes out of them, they think that's their spirit. So everybody's belief, all of us now that believe we have a soul, we have this ingrained in our culture through every kind of culture. We all think that when we die, there's something that comes out of us, and it's literally hot air. And that's it.
No, I agree. And I agree that that's just, to me, is as animism. Animism, the belief there's a spirit-filled life or afterlife. And they, in a sense, are connected to the same thing. And they also thought that the reason, like you were talking about air, it reminds me of, like shamanism has sky burials. And sky burials, to me, are just like the wings itself. Like they said, the air, woof, woof. They're able to, make the air move. They're able to float on air. And so to me, and they're carried up, in a sense, into the stars, which to me, the stars are seen as ancestors in the actual heaven. You can see them there. And but I mean, it's magical bullshit. But I mean, so to me, yeah, and just like falling stars can be just like, a demon, or it could be, seen as one of the ancestors coming down and helping or causing catastrophe because they're not happy. But yeah, I do agree that it definitely relates to the air.
This idea that I just mentioned caused people to believe that there is a supernatural, because they don't realize that air that is actually molecular particles, right? So they think that air is supernatural. And that means now that they have a supernatural element that's moving the clouds around, that's causing dust devils. Like, where did the genie come from? The idea of genie actually comes from dust devils, literal dust devils, that would rise up out of the desert and throw your tents around and everything. And these are supernatural things in these people's minds. And as a consequence of this, we all now believe that there's a supernatural element to nature, to life itself in particular. And I remember being subject to this. You're raised in it culturally. So I mean, you were a Christian once upon a time.
I was raised in a Christian cult, actually.
I came out of Christianity not directly in atheism. I went into a sort of a neo-pagan spiritualism because I was still convinced that there was some kind of truth to supernatural things. And I tried to explore that. I didn't view them as magic. I viewed them as like psionics, like mental aptitudes, telekinesis, telepathy, astral projection. I thought that we had scientific evidence for all of these things. And this began my embarrassing period of trying to explore all of this nonsense, to realize eventually that, I was taking a college class, a second-level college class in biology for science majors, and I remember just realizing that as we see the molecular mechanics of how receptors work in the brain and everything, and just realizing there's no need for or room for a supernatural element anywhere in biology.
I totally agree. In fact, I did sort of the same thing. So when I said what atheist, I was atheist spiritual because I didn't really understand, atheism or anything. So I kind of like you, not pagan. What I thought was maybe that soul or spirit could be real, that afterlives could be real with devoid of God. I mean, I now realize how ridiculous that was. I didn't understand enough science. Because I always tell people, okay, even if you think there's a soul, when in evolution did magic enter and why? I mean, and why only us? I mean, what special?
And of course, I believe that if any living thing had a spiritual essence to it, then every living thing
it would have to be. I agree.
And that included mold and moss and trees and everything else.
Right, which is ludicrous. The whole concept is, but I don't see it as just culture. In other words, in psychology, we know that in a sense, a child under 7 has a kind of a predisposition to this kind of like animistic nature, belief, or they'll add, these sort of a magical thinking, to things they don't know. Like why did that move? And they're like, I don't know, maybe it's alive. But I agree that what happens is instead of a healthy culture saying, yeah, that's actually not true, we have the unhealthy, religion that goes, yeah, that's because that's God. And so people go, yeah, I saw a baby smile. That's proof of Jesus. And you're like, what?
So they're just using confirmation bias or
totally.
To reinforce, to get you to listen to the still small voices in your head.
Right, the voice of a young child.
Yeah, one of the things that the neo-pagans would do would be to train yourself to see just beyond what your eyes can physically see, which I eventually realized that they're just telling you to make shit up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the archaeology and the other historical aspects of how religion developed.
Yes.
I'd like to hear more.
Okay, so I'll give you the quick rundown of my conception. So religious evolution basically starts in Pre-Animism, at least 300,000 years ago, and then Animism, at least 100,000 years ago in Africa, Totemism, at least 50,000 years ago in Europe, Shamanism, at least 30,000. What's that?
Can you give us a basic idea of what each of these are? What animism is? Because you may have a different concept than I am.
Right. So animism to me is a spirit-filled life or afterlife. Totemism is the same as that, just that, like Legos. Everything to me is like, it's just buildings on each other. They all have animism. Every single one of them have animism, plus totemism. Then shamanism is animism, totemism is shamanism. Then animism, totemism, shamanism is paganism in a sense. Something.
Okay, so what are these 4 things individually?
So, like I said, animism is like the conception that life has spirits and that there's some kind of an afterlife something. It doesn't have to have anything else. Then totemism is that you believe that there's physical representations you can make that then embody that concept in a sense. And you use it more of in a magical, tangible thing. And then it also is a way of the culture behaves because totemism is about structuring the clan. And then you add shamanism as kind of a throwback it uses totemism, but it kind of throws back to animism. It goes, okay, too much control, too much structure. Let's get back to more just nature worship, sort of. But it has a new conception in how it views spirits. It uses them more actively, in a sense, which is, to me, on the path to God, concepts. So it starts saying, okay, these spirits can work for us. We can do things. You can even sometimes be possessed by demons in a positive way, to help our clan be empowered and whatever. Like say berserkers or something, kind of a mentality that I can actually embody this thing inside of me and then become powerful. And I see that as very different because especially as it gets towards progressive religion, the thought of being, in a sense of having demons come in you intentionally would be insane. but it's because it's the beginning. And it just progressively adds. So shamanism does that. And then paganism, to me, is when we become more sedentary. And this happens in Turkey. And it's still, in a sense, the roots are shamanism. And then these shamans get fixed to a place. And then they start making agriculture. Once they make agriculture, almost all original goddesses have a connection to wheat. And so it shows that it's a direct connection to this agricultural thing. At the same time, I think, though, not gods were invented, but clan leaders were. Because there's the first clan leader totems happened at the same time. So I think it's almost like a hunting cult and a fertility cult that operate in a sense, simultaneous, like hunter-gatherers. The gatherers do, in a sense, the fertility cult, the women more generally, and then the hunter cult that goes out and hunts and goes and shows their manliness and their clan power and whatever. So you have these dual things, I think, operating as the same, in a sense, religious unit of the clan. And so then paganism eventually, by 7,000, because of war threat, over in the Balkans, invents this new idea of not just the clan leader, but now this clan warrior. And the warrior god, in a sense, then becomes more and more powerful until 5,000 something, in a sense, like in Egypt, it basically becomes, the king priest, pharaoh. And it's those ideas, in a sense, that then at first also at the same time, and that is that there's a god as the main power, but has goddesses. But eventually by 2000, that's wiped out, and basically it's like monotheism, God only almost.
One of the things that Christians seem to have a problem with deconversion, or at least my type of deconversion. I mean, I lost belief in the central God figure, but I maintained the idea that there's this overlapping supernatural universe, if you will.
Right.
And animism is where you imagine that everything has a spirit. Well, I don't imagine that rocks have a spirit, but I imagine that all life did. I was a Jedi.
Yeah.
I believed that this force, that the biosphere was literally a biosphere, and that it was generated by life. And so living things had this, were animate because they were interwoven with the supernatural. So you have the material mixed with the supernatural, and there was no need for a god behind any of that. If life generates a supernatural essence in itself, and that is somehow connected to the supernatural aspect of the universe, of these two universes overlapping, and then life is the blend of the two.
Right.
The analogy that I used was that you have clay, which is normally just dead rock, but it's only malleable when you mix it with water. And so now with water, it's fluid and you can do things with it. And then when it dies, essentially all the water ebbs out of it. And that was the same thing as a supernatural spirit. And then the water ends up reuniting with the hydrosphere, which goes into that Buddhist thing about make me one with everything.
Right.
Right? So I thought I had the basis of all religion. And the way you're describing it now, the concept of animism being the most basic of them, it seems that I went to the most basic.
Well, and we went to one of the most natural, in a sense. What reason that we all do that, or would do that, is because animism, like I said, is not something we're totally taught. We're almost like born with this superstitious mind that's super creative and likes to understand, and it likes to make projections of our own belief systems, in a sense. And as a child, our belief systems are not fixed to a thing per se. They're some to culture, but also just this natural instinct that, we have fear. We don't want to be alone. We don't want to feel powerless. So it feels good to feel like this animal actually likes me, even though it's growling. That this wind that can, destroy me, like you said, can also be one that I believe fills my lungs with life. I think that we want to feel connected. We're scared, fragile, emotional animals. And, and I don't think even atheists, could do this. We could, type of atheism, so I don't think that, it's religious exclusive, but I do think that religions hijack this natural thing. And then they maximize on how to, delude us by it.
Well, so I've seen a lot of your articles where you reference specific archaeological, what is the word? It's not necessarily artifacts, but the archaeological origins of religious belief. And I probably shouldn't have jumped in a couple of times with clarification, but sometimes I think that the audience needs that. I kind of know what people watching these videos, where they might bring up questions, and so I want to throw that out there when I think it's necessary. But if you can, I'd like you to get back into whatever the archaeological origins of religion are.
Yeah, let me. I told you the rough draft, so let me get a little more specific. So to me, like the how things happened, starts off in stone tools. So stone tools, tool use in a sense, is 3.4 million years ago. And there's evidence in Kenya, East Africa, also of 3.3, million-year-old stone tools. And then the stone tools, at that point were just like a chipped rock, and then they basically get evolved to another stage where they become like half chip rock, half tool, and then they become where I think is really the showing a kind of a superstition beginning. Is when the alluvian tools, when they become round, they for no reason. It doesn't make it that much better to make it this like more of a perfect heart shape. It doesn't. But you can see that we start becoming this OCD, I believe. This, and we start becoming so particular and stuff. And I think that the fact that it's seen for a large dispersal, the same behavior shows that it's being, in a sense, it's being taught. And I don't think that they're, in a sense, we're using words, but this stuff is something you can't just like. You couldn't watch me do it. I don't know how to do it, but if I did know how to do it, you couldn't watch me do it one time and just copy it. It's too complicated. It would take a long time, like say maybe a couple hours, maybe even a week or something, depending on the person, or how complicated you're making it. But I think that that is the origin of this simple thing of making something. That humans
think about the way we used to treat things that were made.
Oh yeah.
I mean the way that there would be so much reverence into a dagger or a sword.
Exactly.
I mean, I remember there was a big fascination with the Middle Ages and everything when I was growing up in the 1980s, and people that were actually making their own swords and axes and everything. So much reverence put behind that. But you don't even need that when you can pick up literally like the jawbone of an ass and go kill a bunch of people with
right.
it. It reminds me of that scene out of Shaun of the Dead where he picks up a cricket bat and he's beating all the zombies with a cricket bat. So there's this guy, back when everybody's only 5 feet tall, he picks up the jawbone of an ass and whoops, a couple dozen people with it. And that becomes this huge legend.
Yeah. Well,
which then, of course, has to be exaggerated, ridiculous proportions.
True, and I think that the beginning stuff were probably not actually taking down animals. They probably were getting animals that were already taken down or that had died from some of the natural cause or whatever, and then they're maximizing by using the meat. So I think it starts there, and then eventually we start hunting, but I think that, to me, also, so that's the beginning, I think. It's, like you said, I agree with you. It's this sort of sacralizing of things that starts the problem. It's no religion yet. It's just this idea, this perfection, but then I think it's really fire worship or the sacred use of fire, probably. And there's evidence of fire at 1.5, million years ago to 300,000 years ago. And I think that time is when you start to get, because by 300,000, I think is when you have Pre-Animism. So it's all these previous things that kind of just keep culminating together, and it's that really I think starts it off. But Homo erectus to me is really more than the other ones even that could have used fire before. I think that Homo erectus seems to demonstrate a lot more symbolic use of items, a lot more symbolic use of space. And so, because they're the ones that actually start making huts, at 700 something thousand. Look, at 750,000 years ago, in northern Israel. So the fact that they started, in a sense, doing what we would consider kind of like modern living, where you're making some kind of a structure to, protect yourself, not just utilizing some random cave or, trying to find shelter in any kind of place. But the actual intentional, development of a structure, I think goes back to still the same thinking that to me, all the stuff at the beginning is, it's this loose, growing culture, which then becomes religion. And I find it, to me, when you look at the past, it's hard to tell culture from religion because I don't think the distinction is like we see it. In fact, to me, the idea of sacred and profane is a totemistic, in a sense, idea that's about 50,000 years old, of seeing that there's particularly something special and then particularly something not. And I think at the beginning, it wasn't that defined, because how they use things is kind of all over the place. And it seems like they do a little bit of sacredizing stuff and then they stop doing it and then they'll do it again. So I think it's kind of like a test run, where they're constantly just doing life, in a sense, but with magical, thinking about what's going on when they're doing it. And
of course, not having any understanding of how fire works.
Right.
Adds to.
Exactly.
Because fire, what looks more supernatural than fire, especially if you already believe that air and thus smoke are supernatural.
Well, right.
Now you've got something you can see through that will always also damage you.
Exactly. And also smoke can I don't know when it happened, but I'm sure at some point smoke was understood to actually sort of cure meat or dry meat and could actually preserve, in a sense, life, like you said, the spirit. I don't think they would see the difference between our breath and the smoke. I don't think there would have been a large probably conception of different, because I definitely agree that spirit and soul and all that has to do with wind and air, and because just like wind itself is to them would be that I don't see anything, but yet I feel it. I can feel it, this unseen special thing. And like you said,
let me give you my quick rundown on how religion forms, right? So we have people playing around in clay. Right?
Yep.
They figure that you get clay, you get water, you can mold things. And pretty soon they mold things that look like things. So now they're doing renderings, depictions, and of course they start with animals, and then somebody realizes they could also make people, of course, and so they're making all these figurines, and inevitably, just as any child would, they would say, "Wouldn't it be great if we could just make something look so real we could bring it to life?" And then somebody suggests that, hey, maybe that can be done, but if it can be done, and somebody somewhere can do that, can breathe the breath of life, means start the thing breathing, right? Because that's where the whole breath of life comes from. They don't know what air is. So if somebody can breathe the breath of life into these little clay figurines, then maybe somebody already did that. What if, and this is probably about the time they discovered marijuana, what if somebody already did that and we were the clay? Ooh, there's the birth of religion, except when somebody else says, yeah, but that's stupid, isn't it? And then they beat him to death with rocks, and that's so anybody that doesn't believe the horse shit gets killed, and everybody that believes it is allowed to live and continue reinforcing that delusion.
Well, I would semi-agree with you. The oldest anthropomorphic artifact, is the Venus of Bakram. That's about anywhere from 500,000 to 233,000. Probably I read in the book of Archaeology of Religion, they say they think it's 300,000, which goes along with what I said, Pre-Animism. But what I would say, different than what you're saying, I do agree with this concepts. What I think, because it has actually red ochre on it. And so I think this goes back to your breath statement. So to me, they took a stone and they knew that it had something inside of it. Just like before they made their stone tool, they knew the shape they wanted. And so I think, like you're saying, they know that I have to make this into human or whatever, but it's already in there. Its essence, that I would see how they're using it, it seems. Their essence is already in the stone. I'm not going to bring it out. So the stone, in a sense, an animist doesn't have to be, but generally animists see everything alive. Stones doesn't make a difference. Those are stone people, that's air people, that's star people, that's, earth people. And then what they do, like how they got like handprints on the walls in France and Spain and even in Indonesia, is they take like a blow thing and they spit or blow. They don't paint, they blow. Like you said, the air, they blow the red ochre onto things. And I think it goes back to what you're saying. They thought that when I did that, I'm breathing life into the stone tool. I'm breathing life into my ancestor, because I think the hand representations are probably ancestors and also represent, when there's multiple of them, stars, like star ancestors. But I think it directly connects to what you said about the breath, because they're blowing on. In fact, they used to think that they were spraying it or painting it, but then when the guy tried it, he realized actually it's a bunch of little breaths to make that paint shoot out. You put the stuff in your mouth and you just spit it dry. Which I think. I
remember watching the documentaries about how they go.
Right, yeah.
Like that, which doesn't seem like quite the supernatural breathing the breath of life into it thing. But anyway, so what else have you got? Because I've seen you've done a lot of articles on this. I mean, I don't know if you have a website that we need to promote.
Yeah, I have a website, DamienMarieAtHope.com, but I'm also on LinkedIn. I have a whole bunch of, I have like 48 blogs on all this. And then I have, only on LinkedIn, I have probably 300 blogs on the archaeology and anthropology of religion. And yes, I go very extensive. My blogs are more like an educational, adventure than what people would call a blog. I probably shouldn't even call them a blog. I should probably call them like full-on articles. Because that's about how much I like just to organize there's one blog I have. It took me 22 hours just to put the information on it. Not even to research it, but just to put the information on. And yeah, like some of my art takes anywhere from 6 hours to I've done it for 28 hours. I care a lot about this, and I do it all for free. I eventually would like to make a living at this, but my goal is I want to help people know. I feel like, how dare I be another person that keeps the truth from people? I now know things I learned because I wanted to find out for myself, and more I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Everybody needs to know this. It's like the anthropomorphic human faces on stone tools. They have them at 450 and 300,000 years ago in the Netherlands. It's bizarre, and it's amazing to me. And the fact that 430,000 years ago in Spain is a pit of bones where they threw all these people and threw a stone tool on top. It's like the first sort of like a cemetery or a burial. And then the fact that how the human brain, in a sense, we see it as so special, but 300,000 years ago, it's not that much different. I mean, the architecture inside can be more developed, but they weren't so, like, we think of cavemen like stupid. And even 300,000 years ago was the first wolf tooth pendant found in Austria. I mean, this stuff, I like, what? It just blows my mind. And because I was excited, about this stuff, and I wanted to tell the world, man. I was like, this is amazing.
Well, make sure to let me know of any links that you want me to include so that people can be able to look up your work.
Yeah, I would say that to me, that I'll give you the links towards I wanted Pre-Animism, and it was so long I had to take stuff out because LinkedIn got mad. It's too much stuff. But that's just how much I wanted to give facts. And then I have Animism and Totemism. I have all separate blogs that go to each one. And then each one has separate blogs to it. And everything I do has links and references and stuff right in it. Hyperlinks. I want people to be able to go. I always think, don't trust me. Go look it up. Investigate everything I say. And in fact, I always tell people, I'm never threatened by the truth. So if you can show that something I do needs to be updated or brought to better accuracy, man, I'm more than willing. I don't understand people that are like scared of the truth. Man, that's the only hope we have.
Well, I think it's obvious that when people are, and they clearly are, scared of the truth. I mean, how long have I been doing that thing with the challenge to prove evolution to your satisfaction, and nobody ever takes it? Because they don't want to know even what evolution really is. They don't want to risk understanding it, because then that takes away the make-believe.
Oh, yes.
And that's why they call themselves believers. It's all a matter of pretend. It's not it seems to me, and I hate to put everybody in a dichotomy like this, but there are those who have a deep-seated need to believe, and there are those who instead have a desire to understand and to improve understanding. And so if you want to improve your understanding, then misinformation needs to be identified and removed.
I totally agree.
But if you just need to believe, then you need that misinformation, and you don't want it to be refuted because you want to keep believing. And so one aspect cares about the truth, and then the other group doesn't.
Well, I know, which is, they say they care about the truth, and I go, okay, so if there was truth that contradicted your beliefs, would you update to what's true? I would. If you show me to prove to me there's something that's true, I'm going to have to start believing it. Now, there's a difference that people understand. That doesn't mean I might like it. I may hate the real truth, but at least I know it's true.
Yeah. Okay, so give me another example of
archaeological. Okay, Homo naledi at 250,000 years ago basically has the first, what I would call, cemetery. They really lay the bones out in this cave in a way that looks like, intentional, internment. And then at 200,000 in North Libya, there's the first shell bead necklace. There's only found a few, like 3 pieces of it, but it's more than one. And they believe it goes to an ostrich shell bead necklace. And ostrich shell beads are something that you see way later at 100,000, at 80,000, at 70,000, at 60, 40, 30. I mean, it's something that continues. And more than likely, this was done by Neanderthals, which is important because people have this flawed opinion that Neanderthals, in a sense, were stupid and didn't do anything. And I think that they actually
I remember for a long time they were speculating that Neanderthals didn't do abstract art. So
yeah, that's total fallacy now. I mean, the Max Planck Institute just did, I think, 2 years ago, proved that the 66,000-year-old handprints and bizarre art was Neanderthal in Spain. So they beat everybody. which I think that they gave us ideas towards totemism and animism, but at separate times by separate groups of Neanderthals. So Neanderthals at primal religion, to me, there's these mystery rings that are made by the stalactites. They broke them off and put them like in these circles with little things in between. And that's at 175,000 years ago, and it's in France. And to me, when you look at it, the first thing you think is, wow, it almost looks like a little temple, or like, you would think of in paganism or something. But this is interesting to me that we have all this stuff that comes pre-us that we think these people didn't do. But I think it's, like I said, evolution. It's this flawed opinion that humans are somehow miraculous, created beings. Well, if you start with that, then of course we'd seem amazing. But if you look at real history, or prehistory, not really so amazing. And so I can tell you a couple other things. Just like to me, Neanderthals have this kind of a tool technology, and I think culture relates to it. This mountain steering culture, and it anywhere from 160 to 40,000 years ago. And interesting is that they start using raptor feathers, and they start using raptor claws, and making holes in the claws. And there's even sinew found, I think at least on one claw, that seems to represent this was somehow hung as a necklace, or somehow hung on a tool, or pole, something hung up somewhere. And I think that this is that beginning of this kind of an animistic thinking that's more closer to what humans then exhibit at 100,000. And which is so interesting to me is that I think it also relates to the air, like you were saying, because to me I think this raptor has to do with this flying and the power of flight, and also the spirit, leaving, being carried by the wind, up into the stars. And so I think
give people some perspective on this. Homo sapiens sapiens, our species, and Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals, would have split both from Homo heidelbergensis roughly 300,000 years ago, I think.
I would say somewhere between probably 400 and to 300, yeah.
Okay, because I'm just remembering off the top of my head. I know that there have been anatomically modern human skulls found that were up to 300,000.
Correct.
And
in Morocco.
The same. And initially, the Neanderthals and humans were very similar, but as you get further down, they split at that point. Around like this, the Neanderthals left Africa before we did, and then spread into Europe. And the longer time after that split, the more distinct they become.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, I agree. And I think also because they had sort of a little bit more of a evolved head start, and also they went to a lot more drastic climate than staying, in a sense, in Africa, where the needs. I think that religion evolves kind of the same way everything evolves. Like in a sense, because there's a need, they invent something to sort of try to fill the need. And when you go to a harsher, colder climate that has, in a sense, a different, layout totally, that has more caves or more stuff, mountains, it changes like how you operate in the environment. Just like Native Americans, right? So they come down through the Bering Strait, through Alaska and down. Once they hit California, they act different than the ones that hit the Midwest. So the ones in California, especially in the Channel Islands, they start doing a lot of fishing. Well, the people out in the Midwest, they're not fishing to the same extent. They're doing more, going after large, animals that are on the plains. So because of that, you have more of a totemism, kind of an older throwback, where when you go out to here, they lose some of that. You can see that as they spread out and branched out, that they adapted to their, in a sense, local environment. So I see this such humanness in religion. It's like wow, it's not a guess why it's. If you put this person that believes in volcanoes out into the place where there's no volcanoes, they're not going to keep the volcano god. They're going to somehow, well, now it's desert god. That like you said, dust wind, devils. Now that's the same god. Remember, same god, just a little different.
Western monotheism did the same thing. Another thing is a reference to Amen Ra, is that it started out as an air god, and Yahweh started out, or Yahovah started out as a volcano god, which is the way he's usually described throughout the Pentateuch. Mostly, he's described as a volcano god. There are moments when he's described as a tornado, right? Or the wind, because they're blending these together. And then later you get the other influence where you have Amen-Ra, for example. Amen and Ra are two different gods combined. So you have the air god and the sun god. But then they're combined with the volcano god at some point. So now Yahovah has become a volcano god, air god, sun god.
Right.
And then what else can you add to that?
Well, they add the Leviathan, which does all that also, because the Leviathan, if you read the verses on Leviathan, it talks about bellowing steam out of the water. Well, that would be back to the air god, and it's going up to the sky god, and it is the lower land god. And so, yes, I think that, like I said, like Legos, you can see the humanness because they just keep piling little things on, it's not like, sometimes they make original ideas, but they always did it from these older sources, in a sense.
Yeah. So, and Leviathan, it seems like Leviathan is a combination of a Nile crocodile with a whale at some point, it seems to me. I just see, because you've got the full description of a crocodile. Yeah. Because the Job's bestiary really does describe it as a crocodile. And then they start adding the fire aspect to it. And I'm wondering where that came from. And I'm thinking they're probably just taking that image from whales blowing blowing the breath, because that looks like steam, right?
It sure does. It sure does.
Which, of course, they're just going to equate that with fire, and I don't know.
Right. Well, and I think in a sense, I think that even fire, in a sense, when you understand it, and then with the context you're saying of air, fire to them is air, because if you stop air, fire dies. So in a sense, fire is alive and needs air also. And then also the fact that what fire does is it sends these little embers up into the air, and thus then it looks like, it's not real, but it looks like to the human eye it disappears. It just goes like magic right into the air. So I can see that fire worship probably still goes back to the same thing, which, like I said, all that to me is just animism. It's the belief in spirit, life, and afterlife, in things and us. Just another thing. So to me, that it still doesn't step that far away from what you said about the breath of life and spirit. Not really. It's just different versions of that same very simple idea. What's interesting too is the Neanderthals are the first to burial, which I think is, there was stuff that being done in cemeteries by placing bodies and throwing bodies in caves, but to actually put something under the ground intentionally, is about 130,000 years ago. And it's interesting that how they do it too is almost like a person in a fetal position, which makes me think of like the womb. And it goes back to this belief that like you're burying it in the earth. So it's almost like putting it back where it comes from. And a lot of times they put red ochre, probably the same way, probably, or it could have sprinkled it, I don't know. But I still think it's not unlikely that they didn't just breath right onto it, trying to, in a sense, like you were saying, send them off with this love of the breath of life or whatever. And I don't see that any of these ideas are really stepped that far from what you already said about the spirit and the breath. And I think that's, once you understand, like you said, like that element, you start seeing it and hearing it in more things. It's just they do it a little bit different, but it's still really not that different from that same.
I guess what the difference that I see, for the most significant difference with the type of religion origins that you're talking about and where we are with religion now, is that people want to see an authority.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they always want to put a tiny little man inside the TV or inside the radio. There's always got to be some invisible mind behind whatever the hell they're imagining somehow. And so there has to be this authority that decides. Why does the wind blow? Because somebody decided the wind should blow.
Right.
There's no mechanism there. There's just somebody. The wind blows because somebody decided it should blow. There's an avalanche because somebody decided that should happen.
I do agree with that people have that conception. I think that goes back to the fear thing, that we're emotional, beings, and they're also social beings. So we like to feel not alone. It's like if you take somebody and you give them all the food, you let them read whatever they want, but you put them in solitary confinement the rest of their life a lot of people will become mentally disabled. They will start to have actual problems because we're that social. It's like a need in us. So I think that when we are alone, thinking there has to be someone doing something or involved somehow, it's just our feeble need to be emotionally connected to others. And speaking of that, it reminds me of a Neanderthal mask that was made and found in France. And it's a stone tool that they had dug a hole through and then stuck a bone through it where it looks like its eyes. And it's 75,600 years old. So I think it's connecting to that same thing. It's kind of an ancestor worship, which goes back to that spirit belief that there's something in a sense still there. But the first worship that humans do probably could be seen in their symbolic carvings on ochre that's found in South Africa. And it starts, and they've already classified that there's kind of like a few different evolution of styles. They used to think it was just all a bunch of just scribblings on these small little stones, whatever. But they started realizing they're actually classed. The 100,000 ones are a little bit different than the ones that happened about 75. And then they slowly kind of progress. And this is just in general, goes back to my understanding that really evolution isn't limited to, in a sense, this thought that how we got here. It's how we keep, doing what we're doing. It's just constant. We keep adapting and to things, so we keep evolving. And that religion is not limited outside of that. It's just part of human cultural evolution. And so, doing these behaviors, isn't really. I know I've heard it said, that these things are like memes or some kind of thing. Well, that would assume for me is that they're somehow separate from us. I don't think that they are, in the fact that it's just human mind. It's like saying that, the desire to go rob banks is innate in humans. Well, it may be on a very large, loose idea way, but it's certainly wrong to say everyone has a desire to go rob banks. I mean, everybody
has. This is an important statement because when you talk about the evolution of religion, and people very often tie religion with morality for reasons that make no damn sense to me. We do have to talk about the evolution of morality in here too.
Yeah.
In concert with the religion. I've always had a perspective on this. I've given talks about it, but let me hear yours. How do you equate these two?
Well, we already talked about it. Social culture evolution. The fact that we're emotional social beings. The Neanderthals already have evidence of taking care of the elderly, of taking care of wounded. In fact, at 150 or 140, there's a Neanderthal family that the elder male actually had lost a limb and was still, in a sense, cared for. He probably wasn't very good. He was, had all kinds of other problems, but he was taken care of. And there's another one where the person had lost most of their teeth, and so
Denisovan. There was a Denisovan that had, and people need to understand what the hell that is. There are apparently 4 genetically distinct races of people that have been identified. So that there's Neanderthals and Homo sapiens sapiens. That's everybody everywhere, 100% genetically identical. Everybody that lives right now, we are the same race.
Right.
But there was another one. The Neanderthals were genetically distinct, so they're a separate race, if you will. And then there was the Denisovans. Now, the archaeological evidence, or the paleontological evidence, I guess,
right,
it would be a single finger bone. They found a single finger bone, and from that, of course, they got the DNA, and the DNA showed that it was a genetically distinct third race. And then there was a fourth one, which has not been identified, I don't think, by name yet. It has no archaeological evidence or paleontological evidence at all. It's purely genetic. There's a group of Malaysians that in their genome, they show a distinction from everybody else that exists. Because remember, everybody's 100% the same, right?
Yep.
It's the same genetics. But they're in this Malaysian group, they show another distinction in their genome indicating interbreeding with a fourth genetically distinct race of people that has never been identified from any physical remains that we know of. So just to give people an idea of what the background on that is.
Well, and also
I should mention one other thing too. In any community, you're always going to have everybody's selfish to a degree. Everybody has a degree of self-preservation, self-promotion, and so forth. But the balance of that, you have to have empathy for your family, friends, and fellows, or you're not going to function in society. If you do have this capacity to care about other people and take care of other people, then society is going to benefit, and you're going to benefit as a result. Likewise, if you are selfish as your dominant trait, you lack mirror neurons, or you have underdeveloped prefrontal lobes or whatever, and you tend to be selfish and cruel to other people while promoting yourself alone, such people tend to be isolated from society, either being banished, abandoned, imprisoned, or killed. Right? And so in the terms of population mathematics or population mechanics, I guess, then over time, obviously, selfish people are weeded out of the gene pool, and those who have empathy and compassion are promoted. There's very strong selective pressures to have these people be dominant in society, because society needs those people. And that's where our morality comes from, where religion neither promotes that, but actually works against it very often by saying that unbelievers can be killed on the word of one or two witnesses.
Yeah, I would say, since you were talking about evolution, well, I would say, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I don't know if it's 200 or 300 million years ago, I would say, is the roots of compassion. I think compassion then, because there's a shrimp, I think it is, that actually has like a sac or something where the babies can be, in a sense, protected inside of it. And I would say that's probably the beginning of this kind of a bond parental connection. Before that, there's not as much. And it's that connection. It's that bond with these other things that I think leads to morality, this compassion in general, that then obviously helps the species, develop if they can protect each other. And I think the
first public speech I ever gave was on the evolution of morality, and I noted that the animals that show the most compassion are the ones that were raised in dependence, like being dependent on a mother, for example. And things that just hatch out of an egg alone, and they're already developed to go about their thing. They don't have any compassion for any other thing. They don't care. Why should they? So that I see as being the first element of compassion.
Oh yeah,
your dependence.
Well, yeah, and so I would, like I said, it goes. I was saying it's a social cultural thing to me. Evolution. In other words, the morality. Because to me, like morality, like if you said, can I do a moral act unto myself if I was the only individual on Earth? And I would say no, there's no such thing, in a sense that morality involves our social behavior with others. It's in a sense a productive navigation of our relations with others. And it's that I think is different than when we don't have that. And like you said, because we're a social species, we like to feel safe and comfortable, and we can't feel safe and comfortable with this maniac that's killing people all the time, or that I don't know if he's going to kill me tonight when I go to sleep. Just self-preservation would go, we need to kick him out of the tribe, and so we don't like that, and we teach our kids, see that person? We don't want to be like that, because I want to be able to sleep at night.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so have you done any articles that you're particularly proud of? That you'd like to talk about?
Well, I have.
I should have selected maybe a few.
I have so many. I don't know. I would say, to me, the most interesting is the Pre-Animism. That's to me is because it's so far from what I would have thought when I started this. In fact, I wouldn't even have thought. I would have thought, oh, that's nonsense.
Well, we've got a few minutes left. Let's jump into that.
Okay, so like Neanderthals start making these crystal stones, like see-through stones, and they don't use them. What? They're making these stones, taking all this time to make them for nothing. I see that as just a sacralization, not just art. And then also it's the fact that like the first worship of a human, is a stone snake in South Africa, and it has these little marks on it. To me, they could be scales. I also think that they could reference, once again, I see all that stuff referencing like these shapes and things they put on stuff. A lot of times is to the ancestors and to the stars. And it's this ancestor worship that I think is the most interesting, but it still goes back to that spirit thing. But
don't we have a tendency to what is the word, demonize somebody that when they're lost, we want to show extra reverence for them. We want to pretend that they're still out there somewhere. We want to pretend, and we talk about their deeds, right? They become heroic figures, when maybe in real life they certainly weren't. But we try to remember people in an honorable way, and so we then and always ends up some level of exaggeration, and then nobody understands. Like even authors that we have their words recorded. You'll still hear people today saying what people believed or what they said or what. And when you look up the original source material, you realize it's not even like that. So,
that's a funny thing. It reminds me of one of the things that the most unhappy thing I found out in archaeology is that the statement "this is the oldest" is probably inaccurate. And so now I don't even want to use that statement because I assume that probably it's not accurate, and maybe I just don't know. So
well, I remember that they said at one point that the earliest abstract art for a long time was a South African rock that had crisscross lines on it. Mm-hmm. And they said that was roughly 70,000 years old. And then they started finding these little trinkets like you're talking about that were even older than that. And they said that at the time that, what is it, that anatomically modern humans were only about 100,000 years old. And then they got the shocking find that these skulls in northern Africa, they were actually 300,000 years old or close to that. And remember, I'm just doing this off the top of my head, so I hope my numbers are not wrong.
Well, 200,000, what they used to think that we were, but I agree. At one point, it was 100,000, and then it was 200,000. And then for a long time, it was that, and then because at 195, there's bones of an anatomically modern human, and but yes, the oldest skull now is probably 300 to 350,000. But understand too that's an arcane form of human. That's not. So like that's the male Y DNA, and then the female is closer to is because one is A00, that's the in a sense the oldest, and then L is where the female lineage is of human plus that in a sense. But like I said, but they're talking about Pre-Animism. What's interesting about these figure stones they carried. At first, I just thought it was interesting they were faces, but then I started paying attention that, well, they're not just random faces, which you would think. They're just making random faces on these stones. They a lot of times have a theme of one eye open, one eye closed. Now, I'm not claiming to know exactly what they meant by that, but I would just say that it would appear that possibly death and life. I find that to be interesting because like the oldest one of these is 800,000 years old. From Niger, and it has this humongous one eye open, and then the other eye is missing or closed, and but that's like a common theme, and that 800,000. Yep, I can give you a link.
What is it exactly you're describing?
I have to send you a thing, but it looks like a hand axe, like a little alluvian hand axe, which is like a let's say like almost like a upside down teardrop or something. And then it has like a big eye that they've dug an eye hole, and they made a little nose, and they made a little mouth on the.
So if it's 800,000 years old,
it is.
Then we're not talking about Homo sapiens at all anymore.
We're not even talking about Neanderthals. We're talking about pre-Neanderthals. Yeah, I agree. That's what I'm saying. So, it's absolutely freaking amazing. It's Homo erectus.
That's pushing my envelope right there. Yeah.
But I would say that I want to be careful because that's a sense of one-off. They found one thing that's that old. It could have been one amazingly creative, I'm not saying it, but it's interesting that the theme they did then is seen with Neanderthals. It's seen even, later with Homo sapiens. Was it just the pure accident that they're doing one eye open, one eye closed for this long? Maybe. I don't think that everything is always directly connected, but I do think it's interesting that even if it wasn't, it's probably not wrong to think that there was some sort of a central theme, this animism spirit theme or ancestor theme, this life and death theme that probably did transmit.
All right. Well, Damien, I want to make sure that we get a link for that thing because that's going to be interesting.
I can give people I have a LinkedIn link for it, but it actually is a short. I go to LinkedIn and I put my actual link because it's like gazillion ass long to an article, and if you put it on LinkedIn, it's small and I take it. So anyways, if they go to LinkedIn, so it's HTTP.
No. We're gonna include the links down below. So
okay.
I'll make a title that this refers to the acts that David was talking about. We'll have the link there, and if I need to, if it's a really long link, then I will go and make a shorter URL.
Okay.
So, but either way that should work. I want to make sure that we have any links for anybody that wants to look up the stuff that you're doing. But this one in particular, I want to look at because
it's rocking.
That's anomalous. Anything that doesn't fit, there's probably a reason it doesn't fit, and it could be correct, but if it doesn't fit, then it's probably wrong. And so we gotta look at why doesn't this fit.
Oh yeah, but like I said, it's clearly not just a tool. Absolutely not. Even if you said that you didn't think it had anything to do with ancestors, like I think it probably does, or any connection to religion, you'd have to at least say it's art, because it's certainly not just a tool. I mean, you can physically look at it and go, yeah, that's not a tool.
Well, they're clearly trying to represent something, and that would imply that what's the reason that they usually did this back then? Most likely religious reasons.
Right, that's why I say.
All right, Damien, I want to make sure that I get any links from you that are necessary, where the people are going to want to look into to see your stuff.
Yeah,
because you are pretty prolific. I mean, you've done a lot of articles.
A lot.
I want people to get a wider audience to get access to that. And then I'm going to give you another minute or so to make closing comments on how we can find you, what you do, and what you're about.
Okay. So you can find me at DamienMarieAtHope.com, and that's my website. And in there you can find my blog, and all my links are on the front page. I don't make people have to look for stuff. And I break down the stages of religion all on my front page really quick, and I give you links to my other blogs all on the front page. But you can certainly go to my blog or there's a search box. You can just search what I'm talking about. You can just say Pre-Animism in my search box, and it will bring up I have, like I said, like 300 blogs or something on this. And all my stuff that I put always, even on my art, a lot of times I put links right on the art. Because I don't want you to have to trust me. I don't want you to have to believe. So, like I said, to me, reason is my only master. And I want to always be reasonable. I always want to be factual. I always want to try to, and I think that it takes a humbleness to be willing to be wrong. It takes a willingness to be able to be updated. And so I would say that everyone, is that you can't start with these preconceived ideas of what you think you already know and not be willing to alter them to the facts. And that's what I've been humbled to do at the beginning, and I try to stay that way now. And I inspire everyone, that the reason to see religion is wrong is not just so that we can then point fun at, and poke fun at religion, but to really realize that this is a harmful thing. That I agree with your talking about morality. This is affecting our humanity. This is affecting how we raise children. This is affecting how we accept, science. This is affecting how we pollute our world. It's not limited. The reason why I'm an anti-religionist is not because I just think these things are stupid or are uninformed. I think that they're actually toxic and harmful. The belief that we have a spirit makes me care about another afterworld and not really give a shit about this one. And to me, this one is the one that matters. I don't care if you even thought there was an afterlife. You know what? We do know this life is here. We all can agree on this life. And I think that that's why I feel an extra urgency to teach people as much as possible. How many more minutes of your life do you want to waste on what is fake?
Yeah. Beautifully put. Damien Marie AtHope.
Yep, Damien Marie AtHope.
Thank you for being on.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. That is over with. This was not live, but I will make it live momentarily.